check out you. Dude, check you out. You, there it is. Hi, my name is Father Mike Schmitz, and this is Ascension Presents. So, one of the things I hate, one of the things you probably hate is like when we find weakness in ourselves, or when we just find ourselves like powerless in so many ways, like just powerless to do what we want to do, you know? Where maybe it's because our circumstances, our situation, I'm in a relationship like this, or I have a job that just is crushing, and I'm in a situation that I just can't get out of, and I find myself weak, powerless. Or maybe it's a situation where it's kind of deeper, it's internal, and what you experience is, we experience some kind of physical illness, a physical weakness, sickness, or a mental illness. I know people who struggle with anxiety and depression or bipolar, and they just like, I hate the fact that I'm weak. I hate the fact that, I feel weak, meaning, like, I hate the fact that I feel powerless against this. Or maybe there's someone who says like, no, I have this besetting sin, like this habitual sin I keep coming back to, and I can't seem to break free of it. And in all of this, I just feel so powerless. I feel so weak. And if only, the thing is then, if only God would take that away, then I could become the person He wants me to be. This is interesting. Sometimes that means we conceive of freedom in one particular way. Freedom is the ability to do what I want. But John Paul II and others had said this. They said that freedom is not the ability to do what I want. Freedom is the power to do what I ought. Freedom is the power to do what I ought to do. And one of the things that we recognize as Christians is that God gives us the power in any circumstance, in any interior situation, amidst illness, amidst woundedness, and in the midst of any temptation, we have the power. Jesus gives us the power to do what we ought to do in that moment. That God doesn't just heal us from our wounds, He can heal us through our wounds. Here's what I mean. Years ago, we have a Catholic household on campus. We had men's household, women's household, and a number of these women one year did this big devotion to St. Catherine of Siena, who's just this phenomenal saint, right? She is a saint, as I said. She's a doctor of the church, just this incredible, powerful, holy woman who died when she was 33. She did these incredible penances, and I think she lived off the Eucharist for a while, and she, got the Pope from Avignon back to Rome, this whole big thing. Catherine of Siena, she's kind of like a stud of the world, right? So these women in the household, they loved her because they were phenomenal women too. They're like, we can relate to this woman. And then one night they had a crisis. One day, late afternoon, early evening, they had this crisis. And they're like, Father, you got to get over to the house right now. Everyone's freaking out. Like, okay, I go over there. They had come upon this book. And this one book, written like relatively recently, was psychoanalyzing from a distance of history, like hundreds of years, St. Catherine of Siena. And in this book, the person was maintaining that, it looked like St. Catherine of Siena was holy with her penances, with her fastings, but probably she just had an eating disorder. Like, that was the conclusion they were making it. And so these girls were like, is that the case? Is that true? Is it that, she didn't fast and she didn't do penance because she was holy, but what if it was a mental illness? What if it was like even something like this, like self-loathing? What if she hated her body? What if she was masochistic? What if that's why she did all these penances? What if that is what drove her to do these incredible penances? I know there's a lot of people, maybe people watching, and you might be in that same situation where you hate your body. Say, if I could just have a different body, if I could just be delivered from this self-hatred, this self-loathing. Ascension Press put out this new updated theology of the body for teens. And Jason Everett, Kristalina Everett, Brian Butler, they made this, and just incredible. It's called You. And the idea, sometimes people think that the theology of the body is just about sex. It's not, it's about the body. And one of the things that comes against us as human beings with bodies is not just like sexual issues, but our issues of like, how do I see myself? Do I hate my body? How do I live like, even in the midst of suffering? So if I mentioned the Catherine of Siena thing and you're like, yeah, that's me. What if she did hate her body? That I can relate to that. This might be really incredibly helpful for someone like you. So anyways, these girls are panicking. What if that wound caused her early death? So I'm like, I don't know. So I talked to my spiritual director. My spiritual director is this amazing, he's this genius theologian, philosopher. He's a hermit who lives up in northern Minnesota. I mean, just like, he's like Gandalf when I go to visit him, you know? And so I go and I say, Father, what does that mean for her sanctity? And the priest, my spiritual director, Father, he looks at me and goes, So? I'm like, no, but what if, like, she died at 33. What if that contributed to her early death? He's like, and? He's like, because all that means, he said, all that means is that God was able to sanctify her in the midst of her woundedness. That God was able to make her into the woman he was calling her to be in the middle of her circumstances, in the middle of her whatever wounds she may have had, in the middle of whatever kind of temptation she may have had, that in the midst of all this, God can make her holy. So I think a lot of us, what we do is we say, okay, God, here's the deal. You just take away my circumstance. You just take away my illness, my weakness, my woundedness, my sin, and then I'll be able to be free to be the person you want me to be. And God says, no, actually, in the midst of this, I'm going to make you holy. This is actually what St. Paul discovered in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. He says he had this thorn in the flesh, and it was something about his life, something about himself that he absolutely hated. And he says, 3 times I begged the Lord to free me from this, to deliver me from this. And finally, God said, essentially, no. He says this, God said, my grace is sufficient for you. Jesus said, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. Power is made perfect in weakness. So St. Paul was so convicted by this. He says, so therefore, I'm content with weaknesses. Like, I'm fine. God, you don't have to take them away. No, we can still really wrestle with them. We can still really struggle with them. But he's like, I'm content. God, if you want to keep them, if it's your will that I live in the midst of this circumstance, if it's your will that I don't get healed from my mental or physical illness, if it's your will that I experience this woundedness in this one particular area of sin, then I'm content with my weakness. Because for the sake of Christ, I'm content with my weakness for the sake of Christ. For when I'm weak, then I'm strong. I might not have the ability to be free from that thing, but I have the power to do what I ought in the midst of that. I have the power to take my meds. I have the power to talk to my counselor, even though I just feel like I'm not getting anything out of this. If I experience a temptation towards a sin, I may not be free of that temptation, but I and you have the power to do what I ought, which means I can avoid the near occasion of sin. I can go to confession when I've fallen. You have freedom right now. You have power right now. Not because your wounds are gone, in the midst of your wounds. Because here's the big thing. God wants your heart more than he wants your healing. And we have to get used to that. Our wounds are often God's access points to our hearts. My circumstance is terrible and it drives me to pray. I struggle with this physical or mental wound and it leads me to him. It humbles me and it brings me to Jesus. I struggle with this sin and every time I have to choose hope. Every time I go to confession for that thing, I have to choose hope and perseverance and humility. That oftentimes our wounds are God's access points to our hearts. And he wants your heart more than he wants your healing. I know that is so hard for many people to hear, so hard maybe for you to hear right now. But hear the truth in that. The truth is then, if God wants your heart more than he wants your healing, then he can have your heart right now. You have freedom. You have power. And you can start living that freedom and start living that power today. From all of us here at Ascension Presents, my name is Father Mike. God bless.